Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It's back to school. I'm wearing the shirt. We're all ready. And the education system, I'm told, is doing absolutely fine. There's no concerns going on in public education in Alberta, nothing looming on the horizon that is horrifying. I'm lying. I have to do that now to get through the day. But in order to try to get a little bit of an eyes on the ground approach and perception for what's going on in schools, what are the obstacles that teachers are having to face, what are some of the things that everybody's dreading. Very excited to welcome back to the program none other than the Shield Dog, president of the Alberta Teachers Association, Jason Schilling. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for addressing me by my proper online handle.
You know, I don't know if you remember, but the very first time I had you on, we did the whole interview, and then I was like, I gotta ask, what's up
Mhm.
with the Twitter handle? Because you wouldn't think that that would be something that you would see from a president of a large organization. And then you told the story about it, and it was all it was very touching. And so I thought I would lean into that coming
Well,
back.
it's one of those things. It's like you make a Twitter handle not knowing where you're going to end up in life, and then all of a sudden, you're it's what you have. And all my social media is the same handle, so I'm not changing it.
Consistency is important. It's
That's
key.
right.
It's key. Um, so we're recording this on August 28th. There are some schools that have already gone back. There are
Mhm.
some schools that are going back tomorrow morning. It's all very exciting. And there's some issues that have been bandied about. We talked about a few of them in our last episode. So I wanted to kind of get a sense of where things are now. Um, and I'm gonna give you the first question in a weird way.
All
So,
right.
as president of the ATA, as a teacher yourself, um, what's the number one thing that you're looking at this year and going, we're gonna have to deal with that?
Oh, it's a good question because I have a lot of things that we're looking at this year, but really the number one thing is classroom conditions right now. And that encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses class size, the classroom composition of our students who are coming into our classes, their readiness to learn, where they are on the spectrum of being able to learn certain things. It also involves having resources and staff there to support you, such as educational assistants or other professionals that work in the building, like speech pathologists. We've got the cell phone policy that's coming into place that's going to affect some of our classroom conditions. So really, if I had to say one thing, it's classroom conditions, but that's a pretty big umbrella that is going to cover a multitude of other things because curriculum's in there as well. And yeah, there's a lot of things.
That was a very diplomatic way. What I took from that was everything.
Everything.
You're
Yeah.
concerned about everything.
Well, and that's kind of my job, right? Is to be concerned about everything, right? It's I can't you know, we always say that the ATA we can chew gum and walk at the same time. We look at multiple things at multiple times because as a lot of people know who've been following along, not just in education, but all sort of public sectors, it's like a fire hose coming at you at all times. It's multiple things coming all at once, and everything needs your attention. And that's been part of the real challenge, not only for us in education, but healthcare and other public sectors as well.
Well, let's break our way through some of those
Mhm.
things because there's a lot going on. You mentioned the curriculum. I know there's been some conversation about the curriculum because we went from what I would comfortably call a social studies curriculum that had straight up racist overtones
Mhm.
to they got rid of some of the more racisty stuff. But it's still, I mean, I saw an interview with Dr. Carla Pakla a couple of days ago where she was like, well, it's less racist. So there's that, but it's still not representative of Canada as a whole. What are your thoughts on the social studies curriculum that's being rolled out?
Well, you look at that curriculum and you could even use some of the critiques that are for English and some of the other ones. It's very Eurocentric. It's better than the 2021 draft that came out for sure. They've gone back and tried to talk to individuals and other groups to try to make it better. It's no longer the history of the world starting with the Greeks and Romans in kindergarten and moving its way through the course of time. So it's built a little bit under the current structure, but the current curriculum that we have now, that was developed with the hand of teachers involved in it, is something that it builds on top of one another. It scaffolds. So what you learn in grade 1, grade 2 builds on it, and grade 3 and grade 4. This current curriculum doesn't do that. It's all over the map. You're talking about your community in grade 1, and then grade 2, you're talking about Canada, and then grade 3, you're talking about Alberta. Well, it would make sense to go community, Alberta, Canada that way. So there's a lot of problems with this curriculum. The government did include the association and teachers sort of in the process towards the end, but we questioned, the validity of that and whether or not it was just checking the box. The timelines on it were pretty tight where we gave our feedback and when the draft was announced. So with piloting this fall, one of my hopes with it is that the teachers who are piloting it will give really strong critique and feedback to government about what doesn't work in this curriculum and how it needs to be changed in order for it to work, because we don't want a curriculum in school that's going to fail kids. We don't want a curriculum in school that's going to harm them. We don't want that's going to disparage their culture and their history and their backgrounds. And it needs to be one that reflects who they are in it, because curriculum is supposed to be about life. It's how we learn about life. And if you're not reflected in that, or it's disparaging towards you and your history, then that defeats the whole purpose of what it's supposed to be about. And then the question at the end of the day is, will government, in fact, take that feedback and make those changes?
Would it be safe to say, and I know that if Dr. Peck hears this, she'll probably throw a very heavy rock in my direction because I'm grossly oversimplifying it. But would it be safe to say that when it comes to the curriculum, there were content issues and there were structural issues,
Yeah.
and they've addressed some of the more offensive content issues, which is like it feels like a low bar to celebrate, but I mean, okay, there's your gold star, Alberta government. But the structural issues that you identified in regards to the sequential way that building
Yeah.
concepts are built, that hasn't been effectively addressed. Is that a safe statement?
No, that's a fair statement to say. I think that's part of the problems and some of our critique that we pointed out. So, sure, you look at the curriculum, no place did it really address critical thinking or creativity for that matter. I mean, creativity was mentioned once in the curriculum in all 6 grades. That's a problem. Critical thinking is a cornerstone to what we do with students in school. We teach them facts, but we also have to teach them how to think about those facts and to develop your own thoughts around those facts. And this curriculum is very fact heavy. One of our earlier critiques was, are we actually using a curriculum so that kids be really good at Jeopardy and Trivial Pursuit? Because that's kind of what the curriculum was doing. It was memorize these facts and not question, why am I learning this? And if you want to engage kids in learning at school so that they feel connected to school and want to go, the why I'm learning this is a really important factor when it comes to education. And the facts part is sort of the content. But yeah, there's issues with content still. We had found some things that were factually wrong when we had our staff in our. We engaged teachers who were involved in our social studies curriculum circle and a bunch of teachers from across the province who are experts in this about, look through it. We went through it at a very high level and found things that were wrong and content wise and structural wise. So the pilot should be the time that we figure this out, but it should have been better and had teachers involved in it from the get-go, like it used to be. Like I saw the interview as well that you mentioned with Dr. Peck, and back in the day, and I hate to say that sometimes, right? Because sometimes back in the day is not so great, but back in the day, we used to renew curriculum on a cyclical basis over the course of 3 years. A subject would be revamped. It would go through this process before it was implemented. And everything was on a cycle. And that's how it turned over. And there was no surprises. There was teachers involved from the get-go. It involved resources. It involved looking at assessment. It involved kids and parents and teachers and experts in the field like Dr. Peck and the others who were involved with that. And it made sense. It's why we had one of the best education systems in the world, a curriculum that was used by other jurisdictions across the world, because it was done that way. And this new way of doing it is it's at such a rapid pace that it has all of these gaps that it's easy for us to find holes in it.
I mean, I would make the argument cautiously that any government that doesn't encourage critical thinking, eh, I have questions. And especially when it comes to, like I don't want to, one of the things that I enjoy talking when I'm talking with people is I like to be challenged. I like to not just have somebody when I say something and somebody just accepts that, I
Mhm.
get really nervous really quick because that's not how the exchange of ideas should work. And to me, this curriculum and the way that it's been developed, like to me, the question is, are we developing photocopiers so that we can make more photocopiers, or do we want to start with a photocopier and work our way to the internet? Because if there's no
Yeah.
evolution between those things, then what are we doing?
Well, I've always taught English, and so it's always really important to me, I'd say, with students, with their writing, but for example, you need to know basic things about writing, grammar, sentence structure, spelling, those sorts of things, like the difference between there, and there. And that stuff is important. You still need to know that, but I would always try to choose material that could be kind of interpreted in a couple of different ways, and then have kids sort of look at it and say, okay, I don't quite see it that way, but tell me about that. And then show me the evidence from the story that helps prove what you're seeing. And then write it for me in a paragraph that, has structure and that. So yeah, I agree.
I imagine I've got my theirs down,
Mhm.
the apostrophes. I am 47 years old, and I swear to God, the possessive nature of apostrophes, I cannot consistently wrap my head around that. So
I always, the part that always gets me is the me and I.
that's another one. Because like you think of like all the Shakespeare stuff to use the English stuff, and they took
Mhm.
liberties there.
Well, I'd
Um,
always say to kids who would be like, they get it backwards. I'm like, let's say I and Nate. I'm like, it's Nate and I. It's like, why would you be so selfish as to put yourself first?
that is a
And
good one.
that some kids are like, now I'll remember that for the rest of my life and I'll always get it right. So,
That's a good line. One of the other issues, and it's a weird issue to me. It's one that I personally struggle with a little bit. I also completely understand it, I think a little bit, so it's weird. But one of the big issues that has dominated the going back to school conversation has been the whole piece around the cell phones. And there's no question, and this is where I'm torn, and this is why I'm hoping to get your perspective on it. To me, there's no question that cell phones can be a tremendous distraction. I'm grateful for that some days when I can just play a silly little game. But there's no question that they can be a tremendous distraction in the classroom. I'm curious though, one of the counter arguments that I've heard, and one of the ones that sort of I go to is, yeah, but having the sum totality of human knowledge at your fingertips is kind of cool too. So it's like any tool, it depends on how you use it. What is there a problem in that I know there's concerns in regards to screen time when it comes to development for sure.
mhm.
But is part of the problem almost tied to that critical thinking piece of not knowing when it's appropriate to go to the tool or when to use the tool as a tool or when to play Angry Birds?
Yeah, I think you're sort of explaining that quite well, actually. There's a bit of um, whataboutism in there when you look at it. So yeah, developmentally, screen time, when you look at pediatricians out of the States and the research that we've done with the association with like Dr. Michael Rich, who's out of Harvard, talks about screen time and exposure for kids. And we have to recognize that technology is something that's not going away. We're not going away from where we are now. We're only going to advance, and looking at generative AI is a really good example of just how things are moving forward in a way that we either have to learn to work with it and try to get ahead of it, or we're just always going to be left behind with it. Now, in terms of the cell phone policy, we passed a policy at our annual representative assembly in May that supported a ban on not just cell phones, but we call it smart devices, because it also includes your smartwatch, right? Because you're going to get messages to your smartwatch as well. And that's part of that as well. But our policy talks about the fact that it would then be up to the teacher's judgment and autonomy when to use the device in class, because there are times when you could use the device as a tool. I did in my English class. Show me a kid who uses paper dictionaries anymore, right? So they would use their phone for those sorts of things, or for a little bit of research. I even had students when I didn't have enough Chromebooks for the class, because at the Chromebooks there was only 20 in a cart, and I might have 25 kids, and you're hoping a couple are absent that day so that everybody would get one. And if they didn't, some of the kids would actually write their papers on their phones. And I don't know how they did it. And I'm like, enjoy the carpal tunnel, syndrome of your thumbs one day. But I mean, it's up to the teacher to determine that, and to help the students with that sort of digital literacy part about, this is when we would use our phones. This is too much. This is too little. And then also our policy goes on to say that students will need their phone sometimes for medical purposes. So if you're diabetic and you've got the little thing and you're scanning to make sure that your blood levels are fine. So that's where our policy lies. Now, with the government's introduction of this policy, which echoed a lot of what our ATA policy said, my question and my concern that I raised was that around the implementation date, the ministerial order comes into effect September 1st, and this is the floor of what it is. And but boards don't have to have their policies ready to go until January 1st. And I don't understand the misalignment of those dates, because if you've ever worked in school, if you want to try to bring a rule in halfway through the semester, it's a nightmare, right? But you also have to give people time to understand why you're putting this policy in place: mental health, distraction, bullying. Get parents involved in the conversation so that they buy into it, as well as students and as well as the rest of the staff, and have some clarity. And right now, when I'm talking to my colleagues, there's not any clarity. There's a lack of clarity in some areas about, can I use my phone though as a teacher in school? Because new schools that are being built these days don't have landlines in them. Teachers are using their cell phones. You have to do the two-step authentication on your computer. Teachers need their phones in order to do that. And so there's all of these grays that could have been ironed out before all of this was put in place, so that this transition into this policy could have been a smooth one. Some boards already had these policies in place for a couple of years, and so that's not a problem. It's not a factor for them. But the ones who are just moving into it now are where all these questions are really starting to come out of. And it's one of those things that I've done a lot of media on in the last week. And I'm like, I don't mind talking about it, but I really want to talk about class size and classroom conditions and resources, and not be distracted by the cell phone thing. Is important. We have to have clarity about that. But our focus and our goal is improving classroom conditions for our students and our teachers. And that's where I want my focus to remain.
See, and that's the seg that I was trying to set up, because the cell phone distraction is a bit of a distraction
Yeah.
from the things that are actually going on. And I'm being a little flippant, but I think that is a really important part of the conversation, because
No, I agree with you 100%.
the next item on my list here is, I really want to talk about the classroom sizes piece. We stole a graphic from the ATA, borrowed with accreditation. I'll say, give you guys full props, but we took a graphic from the ATA one, our last episode, where we talked about the fact that according to the numbers that the ATA provided, there's like the target goals for classrooms and what classroom sizes are supposed to be. And when you start to look at like the high school levels, it's getting dangerously close to double what that's supposed to be. Um, and this is the thing that I think is really important to underscore. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm bringing older information to the table, and you're going to tell me, oh, Nate, no, they fixed that. But that's with the numbers that we know, because my understanding is the tracking of classroom sizes is not so much a consistent thing in this province anymore. Am I right, or has it changed?
Yeah. So back when we had the last job action in 2002, we got the Alberta Commission of Learning, which through all of that commission, they set some guidelines for class sizes, which are the ones that you're talking about. We refer to them as the ACOL guidelines, the Alberta Commission on Learning. So we tend to talk in acronyms in the ATA. So if I use an acronym, you're like, I don't know what that is, just tell me to use my words and I'll revert back. But it's like 17 for K-3, 20 for 4-6. I think it's 25 for junior high, and then 27 for high school. Now we're seeing class averages in the 30s. We're seeing high school classes in the 40s. Last year had reports from some teachers, mostly phys ed classes or other classes, that were in the 50s. Right. And our class sizes are growing. And so part of the class size funding initiative that came out of the PCs, and then the NDs carried that forward when they were in terms, and then the UCP discontinued that funding because they said it wasn't working. And I think it was the fall of 2019, they stopped collecting the class size data that fed that class size grant. So they don't have a handle at government about what the class sizes are, or if they are reporting those numbers. And I've heard from school board associations that say we could collect that data easy because we all use Power School and these other things that collect student attendance, and they have the records, they know. It's just the government doesn't collect the data and then report it out. Because if they started to report it out and we got a really true sense of what the class sizes are across this province, you really get a snapshot of that. But my members will tell me anecdotally, and they will send in information when we do our surveys, such as our last one in the fall. Class sizes are creeping up into the 30s for all levels, from K to right through till 12. And that doesn't meet the ACOL guidelines that were there. And but class size is one thing, but it's also the other side of that coin is the composition of those kids that we're seeing coming into our classrooms. They're coming in with more complexities than we've seen in the past, learning complexities and disabilities, social emotional needs, especially since the pandemic, behavioral needs, mental health needs. And we're seeing more students coming in with English as a second language or as an additional language that they need to learn. And a lot of students who are coming in who need more trauma-focused education because they're coming from areas where they might have never been to school before, or they were into a school from a war-torn country, and they're coming in with some issues that are things that we've not necessarily dealt with traditionally in the past. And teachers need support for it, and that's not there.
Yeah, I want to talk about the composition piece in a sec, but before we do, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is the classrooms, the physical classrooms themselves, because one of the news stories that I'm bracing for myself to see is it seems like at the start of every school year for the last bunch of years at least, in the first week you get, and here's the cell phone video of the kids who are doing the classrooms. They're having their class in the hallway, or they're having their class in the cafeteria because there's no space, or they're having I've anecdotally heard stories of the teachers' lounges not being used as teachers' lounges where teachers can catch their breath for a minute, but they're being used as classrooms. So I know that the provincial government made an announcement about some more ATCO trailers, and that's cool, I guess. But what are you hearing from your membership about the the physical spaces that exist for
Yeah.
students?
So teachers have lost their staff rooms. They're losing the libraries or the learning commons, they like to call them, to classroom spaces. You remember back in the day, depending on your school, the gym stage is being converted into classrooms. The school that I left when I was teaching, the stage became the art room, and which actually turned into a really nice gallery space, but that's besides the point. I did a story in the spring just before we broke for summer break. CBE was looking at renting spaces at YMCAs and office spaces downtown to accommodate the overflow of kids. Teachers are teaching classes in stairwells. They're teaching classes in boot rooms. And this is acceptable to our government. This is acceptable to our premier and our minister of education, that students' learning conditions are in a boot room at a school. They're in a hallway, and they're okay with that. And that is shameful on that part. And that's going to be their disgraceful legacy when it comes to public education in this province. It's just, it boggles my mind that they just sort of bat an eye at that. And so, yeah, we've got the announcement this summer of more portables, But it's not like a holiday trailer. You just wheel it up, put the jacks down, open the door, and off you go. You got to hook them up to the school. You got to hook up an HVAC system. You want those kids to have a furnace, don't you? Or maybe they don't. I don't know. But they have to be able to hook those up to the buildings before they can use them. And it's a band-aid approach to this government and previous government not putting the money into the infrastructure for new schools and communities. And you're seeing, especially in the last 2 years, in the urbans, or Edmonton and Calgary and the areas around them, such an influx of new students. They just have no space. I mean, a new school opened up in Calgary last year. It was built for 1,800 students. It's at 2,100 students.
I'm pretty sure I know what school you're talking about.
Well, it's
Uh,
the only one they opened in Calgary last year. I think it's one Google search away from everybody to know what we're talking about. But that's the case in a lot of schools. You know,
yeah. And I think that it's important to highlight, like, as much as people hear the stories of teachers giving up their teacher lounge or their libraries, it's really those are suboptimal learning spaces,
yeah,
and there's no other way to say it. Like, the boot room is tragic for sure. Um, but it's not like you can just take any space and turn it into a classroom where kids
yeah,
are going to be learning. There's certain environmental factors that are going to make learning better, make learning worse. If you're sitting on a pair of somebody else's boots, I imagine that makes learning a little bit harder. But it's only, and I think this is where the the to me the tragedy of the whole thing is that it's only because of the dedication and the tenacity of teachers who want to do the best version of right by these kids that they can, that these situations are even able to come even close to being passable for working. And it's not the conditions that the teachers should have.
yeah.
um,
And
how do
it's causing teachers to burn out and leave the profession. And that's another sort of angle that goes under that big umbrella I was talking about in terms of everything. Teacher retention and recruitment is an issue, and classroom conditions are a major part of that. Back to the learning commons. A library is a space that's supposed to be used specifically for other purposes, for libraries, for books, for that kind of work. And when you lose that library space because there's a class in there, now suddenly I can't take my class down to the library like I used to. And let's get a book and let's look at books and let's talk about books and do all of that part. We can't do that anymore. It just, there's implications and ripple effects to all of that goes through the school. And that is one of those things that I don't know if people talk about it. And then when you look at a traditional classroom like the one that I had, my school was built in the 50s. So it's got sort of a certain size of a classroom that we're probably all familiar with if you're of a certain age. But it fits 25 desks in there kind of nice. When I had a class of 42, not so much. Trying to get around that room was difficult. And then I had too many kids for desks. So three of them sat on the ledge on the back. And um, if a kid was absent the next day, then somebody got a desk and somebody would work at my desk, right? And then again, another chair and pull it up to work at my desk. So they would share a space. But yeah, when you start saying these classes are getting bigger, it also affects that physical space that we have now in our traditional schools that aren't newer right now too.
And I think it's like, to me, and this is, please correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, if I look at what I remember as a normal classroom, do with that what you will, because I have a feeling that the science of education has advanced a little bit since I was in junior high, but I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. But when I think about that classroom and the fact that you have the right amount of students for the right amount of desks for the right room, that's kind of what my experience was growing up. Now,
Mhm.
if you add in a whole bunch of kids, if you get even one complex kid in there, just one, the effect on that classroom by no fault of that kid's, and I want to be really, really clear. I'm by no means saying, oh, well, we shouldn't, just leave them behind. Not at all what I'm saying.
No.
But when you don't have the right environment, the disruption bangs off of more things and builds more. So not only are you now failing the kids who need that extra bit of help, whatever that extra bit of help may look like, but it's now causing problems for all the other kids in a way that it wouldn't. Am I getting that wrong or?
Well, opens up another part of the conversation that I could probably spend three more podcasts talking to you about, and that's funding for inclusion. So when you're bringing students into a classroom who need accommodations of some sort, whether it's part of the physical space or part of their learning, we don't have the resources and the funding is not there to meet all of those students' needs. And that is part of the problem that we're experiencing right now as well.
Why isn't, and I mean, this is probably a simple question, and I imagine it doesn't have a simple answer, but why isn't the funding available? I mean, if school boards have the responsibility to provide the best possible learning environment, um, and they can recognize that they're not doing that because the teachers are like, I'm eating my lunch in the parking lot because it's the only place I can do that. I would think that the school board then has the ability to turn around and say, "Hey, province, it's not working. Where's the?" I don't understand. I'm probably being naive, but I don't understand why this isn't one of the things that is just okay. We'll fix it.
It's political will. It's expensive, right? If you want to do inclusion properly as a policy, which government has it on its books to include all students into the classrooms and so they're not segregated out in a way that they were in the past, it's expensive because you have to pay for the people who are going to do it. Teaching is highly relational. It's reliant on people to deliver those services, and they're not willing to pay for it. They're not. It's a political will. And that to me, I boil it down to those two things. It's expensive. They don't want to pay for it. Like even just look at the minister's letter he sent out today, saying it's the first day back. $9.3 or $9.3 billion in record spending. Well, when they put the budget out in February, it was a record spending budget at that point. And it was a 4.4% increase to the budget over last year. And they celebrated that. And in normal times, a 4% increase to the budget is actually not that bad of a number. But when you've had a budget that's been flat for 5 years at zero, 4.4% is a drop in the bucket of what was needed. We're the least funded jurisdiction in all of Canada. And I welcome you to steal that graphic off the ATA website and share it widely.
We did.
We needed to see a 13.5% increase to the budget in February, and we saw a 4.4. That 13.5% would have got us to the Canadian average. Not number one, not number two, the average of spending per student. That's how far behind we are. Those stats are from Stats Canada from 2021-22, I believe, and it's gotten worse since then.
Yeah, we definitely stole that graphic. And I definitely did like a solid 5-minute rant on it because it blows my mind that Alberta gets to say, we're the province that contributes the most. And oh, Ontario and Quebec, they get the equalization payments from the federal government because we don't pay equalization payments. That's not how it works. But I'll just keep
Hopefully
saying.
that's in the social studies curriculum in high school. We can get that worked out at some point.
But like, how is it that we are one of the richest provinces by most realistic metrics, and we are the worst province when it comes to investing into our kids? Like, I get hydrogen's cool. I don't fully understand why it's cool, but there's a lot of smart people who are very excited about it. So, all right, cool. Let's do something with hydrogen then, I guess. But to me, there is no more obvious investment that any society can make than in their children. And it
Yeah.
is mind-boggling to me that what you're just saying is that it boils down to the powers that be are saying, but I don't wanna. That's
That's my interpretation of it. It's how I see it. I've been teaching my entire career. I've been involved in my union my entire career as well. And to the point where, I've worked my way up to being president. And political will is a major factor. And having the money there, and we have the money to spend on our kids and their future. We have the means to do this, but they're choosing not to. Right. And it's a little bit of what you're seeing in healthcare in the conversation right now. You underfund the system, you overtest it, you say it's broken, and then you privatize it.
but you don't get better results.
No. And
So like,
yeah, and when you look at in the United States, they, the dismantling of the public system there, and they brought in all these charter schools, and they did all these research projects on them. Didn't have better results. The kids still perform the same. And we're an outlier in Alberta as well, where we fund private education to the highest level of any jurisdiction in Canada at 70%.
okay, hold on. Let me make sure I got that right. Because there's a hell of a juxtaposition to be done there. Alberta funds public education the worst out of any province in Canada, but we fund private education the highest out of any province Is that
Yes.
okay? Um, moving.
And then that you're going to get me off on a tangent here.
That's cool.
Um,
That's what we're here for.
but that goes back to the piece of legislation that was passed during the pandemic, the Choice in Education Act, right? And that's where you saw, the funding had been increased before that, but sort of put in, it codified it, solidified it, and then it also deregulated the regulations that were around charter schools. Because if you wanted a charter school, you needed to go to a school district like CBE and say, hey, we want to create this school. And CBE says, no, actually, we can do that within the public system. Thanks very much. And then they go forward. They don't have to do that now. And that's why we're seeing an explosion of charter schools right now. And now charter schools can get additional funding to address any kind of capital building needs that they need to look at right now. And that siphons away money from the public system as well, because those charter schools are funded at 100%. And they like to say, well, they're public schools, but they don't have publicly elected school trustees who oversee those boards, and they can turn away kids that go to that school if they don't meet the criteria to be part of that school.
And now vouchers are part of the conversation again.
Well,
Uh,
we've seen vouchers, and vouchers don't work in the States. They talk about it, but they don't work in the States. It's if anything, I've been reading in some jurisdictions in the States, they're moving away from the voucher system and going back to the public school model as it was traditionally in the past. And that is a real sense of inequity. It creates inequity in the system, and it will be a way that definitely will um, uh, undermine public education in this province, where 95% of the students in this province go to a public school.
I want to talk about the administrative burden on teachers as well, because in conversations that we've had with a couple other folks who are involved in teaching, as well as through the DMs that teachers share, it is mind blowing to me how much it seems that teachers' time is more and more being siphoned away from uh, doing. I mean, and maybe I'm again being naive, but it would seem to me that one becomes a teacher because they want to teach kids the things, whatever the things may be. It
Mhm.
it doesn't strike me that somebody becomes a teacher because, oh, you know what? I just really love back end computer work. That just doesn't seem to. Maybe I'm missing. I'm not a teacher. I don't know, but we've been hearing for years about the administrative burden that teachers are facing. I'm burying the lead a little bit, but what's your sense of the administrative burden going into this school year for most teachers? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse?
Well, I always would say to teachers, I didn't become a teacher so I could be proficient at Power School, which is the system that we use for attendance and marks. And I get it, we have to do attendance and marks and give comments on report cards because that's part of our job. It's part of reporting back to parents about how students are doing, and that's part of the work that we do. But there's been a creep on that over the course of the years. And now, I'm looking at teachers who are filling in report card comments that are pages and pages and pages long. And then, you talk about the administrative burden on teachers. There's also an administrative burden on the principals and the vice principals and administrators in those buildings as well. The amount of paperwork that they need to go through to do their jobs is just increasing and reporting out. Some of it comes from the government, but some of it comes from their school boards. School boards are the ones who are saying that we need you to do this. And I think if you want to look at assessment is a really good example. And I'm not sure if that was your lead that you were bearing or if that's the segue you were heading towards, but I'm going to head there for you. So if you look at the literacy and numeracy exams that have been in schools since the pandemic, that was very quietly announced via email in the summer that that program was going to expand. So now it includes kindergarten right through to grade 3 right this year, will be expanded into grade 4, into grade 5, and then the grade 6 will still write PATs. So teachers now have to administer a literacy and numeracy exam for students in grade 1, 2, and 3. So let's take a grade 2 class, for example. They have to do it in the fall, in September, when you should be building relationships with your students, getting to know them, getting to know their strengths and their weaknesses and their personalities, and which is something teachers are doing right now as school's coming back, getting to know the kids so that you can teach them better. Building those relationships is really key. As we said, teaching is relational. So now they're going to have to administrate these tests. The English language arts one, it's not like the kids just write it all at once together as a group. It's one kid at a time. It takes about 20 minutes to 30 minutes. Some of those kids don't have the endurance to write a test for 20 minutes. So you got to take a break. Well, guess what? We have a substitute teacher shortage. So the teacher can't get a sub to come in to cover the class while she's doing these exams. So she's doing them at the back of the room while 35 other kids are walking around and doing their thing, trying to do this test at the same time. They mark all those tests. They have to enter them into a computer. They have to make sure that it's all done in a correct way. And it all has to be done in 3 weeks. And then they get to do it again in January. And then if the kids who haven't shown improvement, they get to do it again in June. And they get to do it again in grade 3. They get to do it again in grade 4. They get to do it again in grade 5. Tell me that is not a waste of time, money, and administrative a burden on teachers. The amount of instructional time that is lost to these assessments, and then the boards turn around and say, oh yeah, we also want you to do all the assessments that we purchased, please. Do Fontes and Pinnell, do a MIPI, do a CAT 4. So I'm like, why are we testing these kids so much? When do we get the chance to actually teach them to be critical thinkers, to be creative, to love school? We're teaching them how to fill in a bubble sheet pretty good. And we know that that's a life skill that's going to take you far. But we also, it's just, that's one of the things that is out there that, as we're having conversations around curriculum, we really need to amplify the conversation around assessment as well. And just what we are doing, because teachers will say to me, I feel like I don't have a lot of autonomy anymore on how I assess my students because it's all coming in these standardized forms that are quick and easy to mark in a Scantron, but it doesn't truly reflect what kids know or what they've learned in school.
Well, and that's the piece that I find bewildering, because it almost seems like the evidence that I've read, which is not a little, but it's not a lot, about standardized tests, is the results are, let's go with flimsy.
Yep.
They're not reflective of what's actually going on or what a person is actually capable of doing or processing or. And so I find myself wondering, much like the curriculum development, at least we, with V 1.0, and point 1 and point 2, because it got edited on the fly. But with V 1.0 of the social studies curriculum, we knew, oh, it's that guy. You could point and go, there's an ideological bent here, and that's why this person is doing this thing. It's profoundly flawed, but at least you could understand why. I don't understand why it is that we are doing testing that we know to be, quite frankly, counterproductive. Um, who is making that decision? Like, who is
Well,
the
it's
person raising their hand saying, hey, you know what? The broken thing. Let's do the broken thing that doesn't work. Let's put the money into that.
Well, you're always going to have assessment as a form of
For
accountability in
sure.
the system. You want to make sure that, there's always going to be some form of accountability within the system. But I'm always going to fall on the side of the professionalism of my colleagues who are experts in teaching these classes. And so I did tests when I taught English, but a lot of times, sometimes they were traditional, kind of multiple choice reading comprehension tests. But sometimes the assessments were projects or presentations, or, show me or demonstrate to me what you learned about this, and balance that off on the curriculum. Standardized tests like a diploma exam or a PAT or these assessments are going to tell you what that kid knows in that moment. And if in that moment they're tired, they're hungry, something happened at home, they're sick, there's a variety of reasons why kids aren't going to do well on an exam that day. We've all gone to work where we're not feeling well and know, well, I didn't do so well that day, but tomorrow's another day, maybe I'll try harder. But then we capture that moment and say, okay, everything's on this exam. And then I remember so many times I would get my diploma exam results back. And some kids did really well and some kids bombed it. And I'm like, this mark doesn't reflect this kid's ability, because they didn't have a good day, or they're not good test writers. They get anxiety with that. And I like to tell the story sometimes about, I had a student who on sort of the impact of what these tests are like. So I had a student one year, brilliant writer. She's one of the best writers I've ever taught in my career, to the point where I was like, I don't know what I can teach you right now about writing, because you're just so good. Like, really good, strong writer, strong voice. Bombed her diploma exam, like just bombed it terribly. And so she sent me a message through Facebook Messenger, and she was like, Mr. Schilling, she didn't call me Shill Dog. She said, Mr. Schilling, am I a good writer? And I'm like, you're like the one of the best kids I've ever had in my class. I'm like, why are you asking me this question, a year and a half after you've graduated high school? She's like, I just did so bad on my diploma exam. I don't understand why. And I'm like, where are you right now? She's like, oh, I'm in university. Everything's great. I said, nobody cares about your diploma exam right now. Let it go. Right. But that's what we're doing to kids, right? You put this thought into this student's mind that she can't write because she did poorly on one exam and one mark, and it was not a true reflection of who she is and her abilities. And that breaks my heart, that that's what we're doing to kids. And so when I talk to teachers who are administrating these literacy and numeracy exams on grade, 6, 7, 8-year olds, sometimes on curriculum they've not even been exposed to yet, they're crying, and they feel like they're dumb because they can't answer these questions, or they failed somehow. And I don't understand why we would think that is a good way to start off a school year for students.
To me, I go back to like all of the things that we've just talked about, because you're going to say to a kid, "Hey, we're going to do a standardized test that's we hope will catch you at the apex of your abilities, but we're also going to do it in a crowded, overheated classroom while you're sitting. Like, we're going to stack all of the variables completely against you because we don't want to pay for removing those obstacles for you.
Yeah.
Best of luck." Like, it's so dissonant to me.
Well, and some of the times, some of those assessments too, Nate, quite honestly, are useful. Like, I might have worked with a student for a couple of weeks at school and go, there's something going on with this student in terms of their ability. I can't quite put my finger on it. Let's do this test and get a sense of what's going on. And then we might figure out what a diagnosis is and we can move forward. So they do have their place within the system. It's not the fact that we need every kid to write it every time, 3 times a year.
Yeah.
And this is the kickers. Then, when this was coming out as a pilot, when I think Minister LaGrange was still the minister at the time, there was supposed to be funding put in place then that was going to be targeted to work with these kids to move them forward. And when they piloted it, it worked well because they only did it with a small group of kids and it worked fine. But then you try to scale that out to the province, guess what? It didn't work because they didn't want to pay for it, or the funding came in May. Well, okay, this kid tested in September that they had some learning issues. There's supposed to be funding. They got it in May, or, April, May. Now you're going to work with this student to try to get them caught up to grade by June. Well, June comes pretty quickly from May, and then they're off for the summer. So there's a lot of things that don't align with this. And yeah, there's a way for us to work with students who are struggling right now, but we need to talk to the people who work with these kids and do it in a way that makes sense and that supports that. And a lot of times I feel like these conversations that are, I've been saying a lot with the cell phone policy. You sometimes, and anybody who's ever got a job knows what this is like. Somebody creates something for you to do at work that's never done your job before, right? Policies created by people who don't work in schools for schools and then shake their heads when the implementation doesn't go as smoothly as they thought. Or people like me end up in the media going, wait a minute, did you think about this?
Yeah, whatever happened to beta testing and listening to the results of beta testing? Because to me, it seems like having a variety of tests available that a
Mhm.
teacher can pick and choose from and go, this is what's going to work well for this class or for this person
Yeah.
or these things. That would be a much more productive model than we're going to dump an incredible amount of time and effort and energy into getting results that are not reflective of what's actually going on.
Yeah.
So I don't get that at all.
Yeah. So that's why assessment's a big part of the conversation. That doesn't quite often happen sometimes when it comes to curriculum as well.
Well, I'm glad we got to spend some time on it today.
Well, and that's what we talked about at the beginning. Everything matters to me. And,
Right?
that's one of the things.
Um, hey, let's switch to something light.
All right.
There's a new policy that's coming. Um, and I will put all my cards on the deck. I did indeed quote the fact that the ATA has spoken about some of these policies that I'm about to talk about. Um, so I'm pretty sure I have a good idea of where you're going to land in this conversation. But I'm always open to being surprised. So I am, of course, talking about. Let's start with the notification policies. Um, so I'm talking about the if a kid goes to school
Mhm.
and wants to use a different name, and I still have questions about the different name thing because like depending on how much trouble I'm in, there are three variations of my name that get thrown out into the ether. 99% of the time I go by Nate. If I'm in a little bit of trouble, I'll get Nathan. If my mom's mad at me, I'll get Nathaniel. Those are arguably arguably three different names.
Well, I always got the middle name. The middle name came out if I was really in trouble.
Oh, that's like a run,
Yeah.
run.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's to my knowledge, the specifics of that policy have not fully been explained. I don't know that they've thought about like what happens if I want to use my middle name. Um, eh,
Because people go by their middle names all the time.
Sometimes people get crappy first names. It happens. My dad goes by his middle name. His first name is an old timey name, so he goes by his middle name. But there's so many different ways that I want to come at this. I mean, and let's start with if we're going to talk about administrative burden for teachers.
Mhm.
This seems like a really great way to add a very complex administrative burden for teachers. Am I wrong?
I've said the whole time since this announcement that came at the end of January, early February, that this is what was going to happen by the very glossy video that we saw on Twitter. I'm still calling it Twitter. I don't care. I'm not going to call it X. At the time, was that this is taking a sledgehammer to a very complex, nuanced conversation that belongs between students and their parents and their schools. And it's you can't sledgehammer this because we're they're going to harm kids. They are going to harm them. And teachers didn't get into the business of education to out them to their families to cause harm. And teachers will do what they can to support those kids in every single capacity because schools are supposed to be safe and caring places as per the Education Act. It is the law that schools need to be safe, caring places for every kid who walks in that building. Every single one of them should be able to live their true, authentic lives. And I remember the day that these policies, we watched that video, and I immediately, of course, press want to know what we think. And working with the media person that I have here, And we are just talking about my initial reaction. And my initial reaction included tears. And we had to delay the interviews for about 15 minutes so I could pull myself together because I was so angry and upset and couldn't believe what I was hearing coming out of the premier's mouth about some of our most vulnerable children in this system and their families and the choices and the freedoms that they're taking away from them. And so when we look at these policies that are coming, at the end of October or whenever they're going to come this fall, we've not heard much about them since they were announced in January. So I'm not sure how much different they're going to be, but they will cause harm to students. And I'm just hoping that whatever it looks like, that they'll be able to do some work on pushing back. And I don't know what they're going to look at, so it's hard to say what it's going to be. But I am deeply concerned by this. I think that when we as adults create policies for kids that cause kids to harm themselves, we failed.
There's another aspect of it that I would like to explore with you because I think that it's important, and I have spent the last 9 months uh, railing against these policies in every space that I can find, because you're exactly right. I mean, when we take a look at the statistics for the kids that we're talking about kids who are disproportionately at risk of self-harm. They're disproportionately at risk of dying from suicide. They're
Mhm.
disproportionately at risk for abuse from a variety of different places. And those are the facts. And if people don't like the facts, I don't frankly care because facts don't care. Um, but so to me, there's no question. You're absolutely right. These policies are going to cause harm to kids because, and I've said this before on the show many times. I'm sure my audience is getting tired of hearing it to some degree. But if my job as a parent is to build a relationship with my kid where they know that my biggest goals for them are for them to be healthy and happy and safe, if I have failed at that to the point where they're not comfortable having that conversation with me, that is entirely on me. Period.
Mhm.
End of sentence. And I don't know where the party of personal responsibility gets off at disabusing themselves of the personal responsibility that they have for how they've built that relationship with their kids. But all of that being said, I am terrified for the teachers because I am terrified for the teacher that is going to have this policy inflicted on them and a student, and then that student is going to go and something tragic happens because I don't know what protections there are for those teachers. And my heart breaks for the fact that it is an inevitability that somewhere there's going to be a teacher who's going to blame themselves for an outcome that was decided on by a premier who apparently can't wrap her head around the concepts of safe and caring.
Yeah. Um, well, there's a lot there. And first of all, I'm going to thank you for the work that you are doing to talk about this and these policies in public spaces, because it's important to talk about these and to have an understanding as to why our position is of a certain position against other ones. You talked about, as a parent, we all want my child to be safe, happy, and healthy. Well, so do I as a teacher. I want my students in my classroom. We're on the same page on that one. But these policies are designed to drive wedges between us, right? To us and them, each other. And to say, well, the other side is saying this and we're saying that. We're coming from the safe. We want our kids to be safe, happy, and healthy. If these policies come out and this becomes the way, we've said, we will, as an association, work to protect our members when they're behaving in reasonable and in the right manner. And that's what we'll do. And I don't know what that looks like right now because I can't crystal ball into the future of what that would be. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But we shouldn't be coming to the bridge to begin with.
No, no, 100% not.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest tragedy I think of all of this is that something that should be a self-evident truth. I had a variety of teachers growing up, and I have teachers in my family, more than one. And it goes back to what I said when we were talking about the administrative burden piece. I don't think that people become teachers because, hey, you know what I'd really like to do? I'd really like to ruin a kid's life. There's my life goal. That's what I want. I want to absolutely just crush their spirit and will to live. Okay, let's start, I don't know, 6 years of university so I can accomplish that. Um, that just is not a thing.
Yeah.
Um, and the fact that there is a perception that exists that there are teachers, and again, going back through all of the things that we've talked about, through the administrative stuff, through the testing stuff, through the classroom sizes, through the classroom complexity, the fact that anybody thinks that there's a teacher who, in the face of all of that, is going, you know what I want to do with the spare time that I don't have in the classroom? I'm going to try to do some woke ideology. Like it's
Yeah,
so
it's not
far
happening. And
afield.
and we're seeing things like events being put on by the MLA from Calgary Lougheed, like the Let Kids Be Kids event that happened in the spring, right? So then you get people who get up on a microphone under the UCP banner that's right there on the stage and say things that are untrue, like teachers are showing pornography in schools. That kind of misinformation and mistruth and disinformation that is being put out there is also used to drive wedges between people. And it's a distractionary thing. And some of my colleagues get very angry about that stuff, as they should. And, we call them out on it when it happens. But teachers don't have time necessarily to start chasing down mistruths about that stuff because you're right. They're busy trying to do what they can best for their students. They don't have time. I was joke at the memes. They're like, or the memes. Sorry, I call them memes because I'm older. The memes were, like if I could indoctrinate kids, they'd write their names on all their assignments and put their phones away, right? Because it's just not what it is. There's a curriculum out there. There's nothing that's secretive about education because it's all online. It's all on the Alberta education website. So when you talk about administrative burden, and just to add to this a little bit with these policies that are coming. So part of what we're also going to see is an opt-in to instruction, as opposed to what we currently have in the Education Act, where parents can opt out of instruction when information is coming home. So now that's going to put an extra burden on everything and try to get that done. And then some kids are going to miss out on some very valuable instruction. And there's a lot of concern about that as well. Plus, getting third party people who are coming in or to do conversations or to teach around sexual orientation, gender, or identity. So, for instance, where I worked, we had the health nurse came in to do that unit in grade 11 in the COM class. So now you got to get all of that vetted by government. Um, and a lot of times it's already vetted because there are resources that have been vetted by Alberta Education for teachers to use in the classroom. There's no surprises there. So there's all of these extra things that are being included and I don't know what the timelines are. I don't know what it's going to look like. But if all of a sudden this comes down in the fall and we're going to incorporate these things during this school year, on top of cell phones and on top of everything else that we have going on, it is going to drive more of my colleagues out of this profession. And the teacher retention recruitment issue that we see right now is only going to get amplified.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the fact that there are elements out there that are just lying. They're lying. They're just lying.
Yeah.
And it should not be, I don't think, the responsibility of teachers to have to be the ones that say, well, that's a lie. That responsibility should fall to, I don't know, elected officials, maybe, like maybe the premier. And honestly, I think that you were talking about the vetting by government. If there was any indication that this government was vetting things on an evidence-based manner, I think that there's a whole lot of people who would be a whole lot less squirrely about it. But the fact that these policies are coming in with the premier saying not because of what has happened, but because of what could happen, um, that to me shows an ideological bent that's like not in any way evidence-based at all.
Well, and
Uh,
I'll hear the odd story where someone will say, well, a teacher showed this. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe that was inappropriate of that teacher to show that. There's a process in place to deal with that. Follow the process as you would in anything else. But again, it's this sledgehammer approach to an issue and a concern that needs to be handled with grace and with some consideration. I don't want to say the word mindful because the young people have taken it over with demure, but you need a mindful and thoughtful approach to doing this, right? And this is not the way. There's a better way to do it, and I think that we as Albertans need to push back hard on that and find the better way.
Yeah. I'm going to do things a little differently. Actually, I'm going to before I do things a little differently. Is there anything else that you want to highlight in regards to things people are going to deal with going back to school, other than everything?
I'm just trying to think in my everything folder of I got it right here. Here's my everything
It's a
folders right
big fold.
here. That's just the everything for today folder. Um, I mean, there's a lot, and the start of the school year is always an exciting time, right? There's anticipation, there's some joy. Kids are eager to come back to see their friends and see their teachers and that. But I also know that there's a cloud hanging over this school year where my colleagues are feeling burnt out and they're like questioning, can I get through this year? And classes are going to grow and resources aren't going to be there. And we really need, I said the other day, somebody is a parent and you're taking your kids to school this week, look at their class sizes. And if it's grown a lot, then you need to get on the phone and call your school trustee and your MLA because teachers need help in pushing this forward. And parents have you have a lot of power in your voice as a parent on this topic. And to get on the phone and start hammering those MLAs and saying why. And even, I'll say NDP MLAs as well, right? Because a lot of them don't know what's going on in schools either. And so they need to know as well so that they can better ask questions in the legislature about public education so that they have those stories that they can share when they ask questions of the minister in education or the premier about what funding. So sometimes I'll talk to people like, oh, well, I have an NDP MLA, Jason. I don't need to talk to them about education. Oh, you sure do, because they don't always know what's going on as well. So get on the phone to all of them.
I know that for some school districts, teachers aren't allowed to talk to school board
I was like that. My district was like that. We were not
That's
allowed to talk to the
the dumbest
trustees.
thing. I will not for the life of me ever be able to understand that because it just
But you
seems
know
like,
what, Date? I did anyways. I got in trouble for it.
there you go, good.
And I was okay with that, right? Because my trustee needed to know. And I remember even one time early on meeting as when I was still vice president, we met with a group of trustees and we were talking about aggression in schools. And the trustee had said, well, I've not heard of this as being an issue before. I said, then you're not asking the right questions at your meetings. And so I would actually talk to the trustees in my district, and I did get in trouble for it a couple of times, and I didn't care, because and that's just me. I know that's not the same for everybody. Everybody's comes different circumstances in their life, but that's when parents need to start having these conversations then on behalf of their students and their teachers and start asking questions of trustees to ask questions of government and to ask questions of government and keep asking, keep pushing. Don't, I always say to people, you get the talking points, push back through the talking points, right? Don't just take the first response back that you get as the response.
And I think it's so important to highlight that just because somebody's an MLA doesn't mean that they can't contact a trustee. So if you're like a teacher, you're not allowed to your school board trustee. But if you email your MLA and say, "Hey, I can't talk to my school board trustee, but here's
Yeah,
a list of things," I think there's some options. And
I know. There's that. I also get annoyed myself. This is myself being annoyed. Um, there's a bit of a shell game. Oh, minister, this. Oh, that's school boards jobs. And school boards. Oh, that's the government job. So the buck gets passed back and forth with that. I'm like, well, if it's both of your jobs, then neither of you are doing it. And then let's figure out what we need to do with that.
I think fundamentally, if
That's
somebody's
just personally that's one thing that really really just gets my crank going sometimes here.
You're going to be, if you're going to run to be a school board trustee and your number one priority isn't how do we make things the best possible environment for kids, then what the hell are you going to do in there?
Well, and we have a trustee election coming up next year, and we're hearing from groups like Take Back Alberta that we're going to organize and we're going to take back the school trustee level, and we're going to put in these draconian things, and we're going to ban books, and we're going to do this, and we're going to fire all the teachers who don't do what we want. We're going to fire the principals who don't do all that we want. Other side has to organize. Talk to people who you think would be good school trustees. I've been saying it to my members for a year. Retired teachers, I think you'd be a good school trustee. Have you ever thought about doing that? You could run, Nate, for school trustee in your
I,
area.
I am actually, I will say this, I'm very fortunate in my area in that the person who is a school board trustee is I think doing a fantastic job and I want her to run. I do not think that I could do a better job than her. And I think
Then you work to support her, right?
100%,
Yeah,
100%. We had her lawn sign up, and it'll go
awesome.
up again as soon as she announces
Yeah,
she's running.
this because the school trustee election is always one that's doesn't get a lot of fanfare or notice, and a lot of people don't vote in them. Like I remember going to the Lethbridge election. I can't remember what year it was, and the trustee list was like it's like this long of names, and I'm like, and luckily, within my job and my position, I know who these people are, but a lot of people don't, and so they either vote for a name they recognize or they don't vote at all. And so the voter turnout is quite low for trustee elections. And people who want to do nefarious and bad things to education are counting on that.
You kind of took away what my question was going to be. What would you say
Sorry.
to parents?
Oh.
As you were going, I was just like, is he reading this? Uh,
Yes.
what would you say to kids who are going back to school this year?
No, talk to your parents about the things that you're seeing in school as well. About your class sizes. What are you seeing? What are the needs that you have in school that aren't necessarily being met? And I know it's sometimes funny because when my sister's kids were going through school, my sister would be like, the teacher, the teacher, the teacher. I'm like, you need to go talk to the teacher. And, what my nephews is telling you is one side of the story, but probably chances are what we're looking for is over here. So, be honest about your experience at school and how it's going. And kids can be politically active as well. I think even as young, 16, they could join a political party, like get involved. Like this is your future. This is your school. I always would say to my students, there was like, well, when you graduate high school, it's like your life begins when you graduate high school. I'm like, no, it doesn't. You're living a life right now. You're involved in it now. Get involved in your life right now and advocate for those things. Advocate for the things that you care about. If it's, the environment, if it's coal mining, if it's whatever it is that you care about, get involved in and learn about it and talk to people about it. A lot of times, I'm surprised, we go back to this graphic about us being the least funded school jurisdiction in Canada. People don't know that. They're like, we are. And I'm like, yeah. And then once you find out and you start talking to people about the things that you care about, then they understand that. So get involved
What's your
and
message
put
to
and
teachers?
put your phones away.
There you go.
Yeah.
See, but here's the thing. Before I want to ask you what the
Because I said it about 1,000 times before I started this. Put your phone away.
um. See, I go back to like I remember the stupid graphing calculators, and to me, to like have to go out and spend like 150 bucks or I don't know how much a graphing calculator costs. They were not cheap.
No,
But like I feel like there's an app for that.
there probably is, right? And this is why our policy, when we're back here again, talks about the teacher having autonomy on how to use them in class, right? So if there's an app for that, then yeah, as a teacher, I'd be like, okay, get your device up. But one of the things that we haven't been talking about with this policy is, okay, well, if kids have to lock their phones up, then you have to guarantee as a school district that there is a laptop or a Chromebook available for every kid in your building.
Yeah.
And that's not happening.
No, it is not. Um, What's your message to teachers as they head? I mean, I know that a lot of teachers have already been back. Some of them are doing classes already. I know that there's a lot
Mhm.
of prep work that goes into actually opening the school doors. What's the message to teachers? And then I got one more before I let you go.
Yeah, well, this is a big one too. This is the big umbrella one as well. I just wrote something for the cover of the 18 News that is actually just coming out this week. And it's really, we understand, I understand in my role and the people I work with here at Barnett House, the challenges that we're experiencing and the issues and the concerns, and that um, it's difficult right now. And I hear a lot from teachers who are burning out, who are they're crying, they're not meeting the needs of this. We talk, it's called moral distress, right? And I feel it in this job, and people feel it in their jobs all the time. This notion that you know what you need to do in order to make your students learning the best, but you don't have the tools to do that. And it's distressing at the end of the day to think that you failed a group of kids and that you couldn't meet their needs. And we need to stick together as teachers and as colleagues and work together on a common front and push things forward um, to the best that we can to provide solutions on the issues that we're seeing, right? It's not enough for me, Nate, to come on this show and to go on to a bunch of other, media things and someone said in an email that they sent to me, you look like such a miserable bastard on the news all the time. Well, yeah, I am highlighting issues and concerns, but we also have solutions to make this better and to move it forward for people. And we need to make sure that we are working together, keep focused, as I said before, on what we see as solutions to these issues and not get distracted and allow others to drive wedges between us, and really keep focused on making education better in this province for our students.
I don't think that you were miserable for the whole conversation. I mean, you lit right up when you talked about that young lady who had the gift of writing. So I think that
That's my news persona. Yeah.
it's
And it
the
was funny because
power.
the email told me if I just smiled some more, maybe, just maybe, the government would give us what we wanted. And
Oh,
I
that's
told my colleagues that, and my female colleagues are like, "Welcome to our world."
my last question, and it's this is a hard pivot. I apologize for this, sir, because we're just making a bunch of jokes. But if I leave this question unasked, I will hate myself. Um, we've highlighted it already in the course of the show. The government is singling out some kids, and because they are being singled out, I think it's uh, incumbent on the rest of us to respond to that. And so I asked you what you'd say to teachers. I asked you what you say to parents and kids. I want to ask you to say, what are your thoughts? What is your message for the kids that are the targets of these horrifying policies that Danielle Smith is bringing forward?
I just got goosebumps when you asked that question, and I'll try not to get emotional about it, um, because this really just goes to the fundamental core of basic human rights. These students, whoever's listening to this, you have the right to be who you are. You have the right to live your true, authentic life. And your teachers care about you. And they want schools to be safe, caring places for you. They want you to be successful and happy and healthy. And we'll work to make that happen. And that we're here for you and we love you just as much as every other student that we have, even on the days that you drive us crazy. But yeah, to me, this is a fundamental issue, and um, we always have been, and we always will be here to support them.
I'll lighten it up again because I don't want to leave it on that note. Um, I have a kid who's in junior high school, and when he
Well,
heard,
good luck.
yeah, I know, right?
I love
Um,
junior high kids. It's when I first started teaching with junior high kids. They're they're a lot of energy. They take a lot of energy, but they're a lot of fun some days.
Yeah, they're both learning. The apple has not fallen far from the tree, is how I'll say that. And this gets to my next question because I'm like torn on this one. My eldest has said this is the dumbest set of policies. I'm going to crash the system. I'm going to go to school every day and I'm going to identify as a different thing and I'm going to change my name. Are you cool with that, Dad? And my reaction is, you go. But I also don't want to ruin the teachers. So like, what's your take on that strategy?
And I love a little bit of civil disobedience myself. But yeah, I mean, you're going to drive your teachers crazy doing that. But you know what? I would say to students who are thinking that, find a way to redirect that energy into uh, you know, getting involved, writing letters, going to protests, going to rallies, making, why can't a student make an appointment to go talk to their MLA? Right? I was here government talking about, oh, we want to hear from the kids and we're doing this for the kids. Well, then sit down and talk to some kids about this. And they might have to go with their parents to do that. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I will tell him to go light with it. He can do it a couple of times just because I don't want to completely discourage the civil disobedience from him because apples and trees and all that. Mr. Schilling, I want to thank you so much for taking your time to chat with us today, and the length of time that you granted us today. Is before I wrap up, is there anything else you want to say? Is there anything else you want people to hear?
Oh boy, let me go get my umbrella with everything that's in it. We'll just repeat the whole conversation we just had, because like I said, I could talk about this I don't know how long we've been talking for, but I could go on for a couple more hours, but I don't know if you're making long format podcasts now. So we'll
Always been
wait for
long
that.
format.
I'll say this, there's a lot going on in public education, and public education is important for our society as Albertans. We're talking about our kids' futures with that. And, as someone who works in this role and someone who taught for 20 years before I became president of the ATA, we need the help of parents and community members in our work on advocating to make public education better in this province. It's not one thing that one group of people or one person can carry and change by themselves. We need a group of people to work together, to hold MLAs and government to account for their lack of funding, their underfunding of the system. It should be unacceptable that our students are going to school and not having their needs met, that they're not having a safe and caring space to go to, that they're not able to get, like a speech pathologist, that we don't have enough counselors in our schools to address mental health needs. That should be unacceptable to us as a society, because these are the kids who are going to be running our province at one point down the road. This is our future. You and I are dependent on these kids for when we become senior citizens. And we all need to be working towards this common goal. And I think that I would just encourage people out there to get involved.
Going to end it on those words right there because I can't think of better ones to end it on. Jason Schilling, thank you so much for taking the time to chat tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case, maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.